Welcome into episode 35 of the Josh Hendrickson Show. I'm Neal McCready. That is Josh Hendrickson, of course, the chair of economics at the University of Mississippi. It is Wednesday, January the 22nd. I was out walking. I pulled up. I walked up to my driveway. I'm like, who's that? And I recognized it was a car, had the Ole Miss tag thing on the back. And I was like, I was trying to think of which of Carson's friends that might be. And then I realized, oh gosh, it's Wednesday at 3:30. We are doing this week. I had spent all day thinking we weren't doing this week. So my bad. Welcome in.
Good to be here.
I don't really know what there is to talk about. Not a snow and no. Your thoughts on Monday? What sticks out 2 days later from Inauguration Day?
The golden age of America has begun. I mean, that was actually like a perfect way to start his speech. Like, because I think the way that the media covers Donald Trump is like he, like he's really dark, right? Like they're like every time he gives a speech, they're always like, "Oh, this is a very, very dark speech from Donald Trump." And
there are people that are scared.
Well, and this is the thing though, is that like if you actually listen to his speech, not just on Monday, but pretty much like most of his speeches, they're not dark. They're actually very positive. Like he speaks about, a vision of the future, a vision of America, optimism about, what we can accomplish. I mean, his slogan, for heaven's sakes, is "Make America Great Again," right? Like it's the idea that like we were once great and we can be great again, right? Like this is kind of the narrative. And so, I just thought, I thought the speech was done very well. And I thought the speech was done very well because it really hit on everything that his campaign was about. And it really hit on everything that, that I think he really believes, which is like, first off, it started by just berating the people behind him for all of the terrible things that they've done to like create a lot of the messes that we're in, which I found great because, those people had no choice but to sit there and listen to it. But also, if you think about what his message was basically, we want to have common sense back.
Yep.
We want to be prosperous. We want to bring back prosperity to the American dream, and we want to bring back peace.
And then he wants to make decisions that are based on first consideration, what's best for America.
Right. And so I think that it's absolutely insane to me that like this idea when he comes out and says like, we're going to treat America first, this is treated as like some kind of controversial statement. And it's like, if you went back and you talked to like George Washington or John Quincy Adams or something like that, and you said like, hey, we got this guy running for president, he says he wants to put America first. So like they would just be like, yeah. Like that's, like yeah. It's very common. It's pure common sense. And so it really cracks me up that this is somehow sort of controversial that you should be putting America first. And I think also too, sort of not to get ahead of ourselves, but I mean, part of the issue is that I don't think that people have ever really, in recent memory, I don't think that anybody has seen a politician like Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, in a lot of ways, is actually like what a politician is supposed to be, which is you go in front of a group of people and you ask them what they want from you, and you tell them, if you vote for me, I will give it to you. And then when you get elected, you give them what they asked for. And that's just very, very basic politics. And he's very good at it. And yet it's a politics we don't see. I mean, one of the reasons that he had all this initial support in the first place was because you had a lot of politicians that made promises and then they got elected and then they're like, it's going to be difficult. I don't know if I want to spend political capital on that. And
it's going to make people mad. Media is going to criticize. The other side's going to call you names. There are going to be people on your side that aren't going to like it because there's going to be a concern that if we actually do these things, it's going to be harder for me to get elected in my district or in my state. So those kind of things lead to paralysis by analysis. And in this case, you have a man who served 4 years as president. He spent most of those 4 years playing defense. Very rarely had the football. If we make a sports analogy of it, actually had several like where he had to have goal line stands, and then lost. Spent 4 years essentially playing a lot more defense. I mean, seriously, serious defense. Got shot. Wins an election. And this time walks in the door literally going, okay, I said I was going to do these things, and this time, here we go. And to me, there's a noted difference. Our mutual friend Ike Fessler said this on Sunday. I did a kind of an inauguration preview show with him, and he said he thinks it's probably the best thing that could have happened to Trump the last 4 years. Losing, having 4 years to think about what I would do if I get back in the office, and then I think having advanced time to believe he was going to win and to have a plan, and this time to have people in place to execute that plan. I think you know more about this than you've really let on, but I think they were much more prepared this time, literally and figuratively, for day one than they were in 2017.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, but to me though, there's a couple of things here. So in relation to this being sort of the best thing that could happen, it's not just the best thing for Trump in terms of strategizing and in terms of like, really, having a chance to kind of regroup and put together these plans. Those 4 years also created a permission structure for him to actually be able to implement those plans. Right. And like, because he has been ahead of a lot of the general public for a long time. Like there are just a lot of things that the general public, I'm not talking about like, hardcore like Trump supporters, just the general public. There are so many things that he was just ahead of them on, where they just assumed that things were working properly. Like they assumed that you could trust the institutions. They assumed that, everybody does their best. And also the other thing is that, when Joe Biden came along, there was so much of a desire to quote unquote go back to normal. And Joe Biden was promising that, like, we're going to go back to normal. And what people realized is we never went back to normal. That was it, that like actually everything got dialed up to 11, for those 4 years. And so a lot of that time actually created the permission structure where not only does Trump know what he needs to do, but where the public is like, yeah, just go do it. Like, this is it. I've had enough. Like, just go do it. But then even on what they've done. So yeah, I mean, I know that they had plans for this. I know that they were ready to go on day one. I know that because I know some of these people who are there implementing these things. I knew what the plans. I knew what some of the plans were, but even I have been kind of amazed at how quickly they've come out and just started taking all of these executive actions, started going out and doing these things immediately. Like there are even things that they have done through executive action that I didn't know were coming. Right. And so like there are just a lot of things that it was very, very clear that they knew that, hey, we've got to start on day one and it's pedal to the metal from day one, because we've got to get these things done and we've got to get them done as soon as possible, because this is a one-term president, and that technically means 4 years, but in reality, that doesn't mean 4 years. It really means probably you've got to get most of this stuff done in 2.
Yeah, and I've said this to you a few times that at 12:01, which was literally the time that he got sworn in, I think it was the reason, not defending Roberts here, but I think Roberts was aware of the clock in the swearing in and was trying to get it done at noon, and they were running 60 seconds late. I truly believe that. I think that was the reason that he started it before the family got in position, because the Vance family sort of got in position and then they moved it, and then I think it was an accident. I think he was trying to do this constitutional thing that in reality was fine. But I think I thought about it at the time, and since I've subsequently thought about it, I think Roberts is such a person, you know what I mean?
Right. Yep.
Not a criticism, but I think he must have been thinking in his mind for those 30 whatever seconds, we don't have a president. Biden's term had ended
Right.
at noon, and Trump was not yet sworn in, though I think technically Trump was the president even before he was sworn in because his term. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. That was the thing I was thinking about. People in my field were going nuts with it. See, Trump didn't put his hand on the Bible, and see, and it's like, stop. I want to go into a couple things because I want to get your thoughts on a few things. Sunday morning, you had the mass. I think it was Sunday morning. Everything's gone so fast. Sunday morning, you had the mass pardons from President Biden, exercising Section 2, or I think it's Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution that allows him pretty much. I mean, there are some limits, but there aren't many limits on who you can pardon. Fauci, all of the J6 officers and such. And then the following day, maybe that was that morning, and then it was hours later in the final minutes of his presidency, literally while he was actually sitting in the Capitol, but he was still the president. He pardoned brothers, sisters, brothers-in-law. I mean, I think it was 5 or 6 people from his family. What did you think of the sweeping use of the presidential pardon at the end?
Well, one of the things is like this is very clearly, the epitome of the Joe Biden presidency, which was that I'm going to lecture you about norms and then I'm going to shatter all of those norms. I mean, that was really like what the entire presidency was about. I mean, he was going around talking about, Trump wants to put his political opponents in jail while he's trying to put like Donald Trump in jail. Like this was just to me, I don't like that he did this because I think that it sets a very, very dangerous precedent for presidents going forward. However, from a political perspective, I'm kind of glad that he did it because it's a mask off moment. And that's the thing is that we need these clarifying mask off moments from people so that people understand like what's actually going on and like where and where we are, and like that they can't just be captivated by rhetoric, because this is a tactic. I talk about this on here all the time, is like this has long been a tactic of the left, which is like we appeal to your values. And but then when the left appeals to your values, then when things turn around and you try to appeal to those same values, they don't share those values, and so that argument doesn't work. And this is a prime example. I mean, there are actual videos of Joe Biden, from right after his election in 2020, talking very, cautiously about, Donald Trump and, what if he's going to pardon all of his children preemptively and like other family members and maybe himself and all of these kinds of things. And, there's Joe Biden sitting on, I think CNN, saying like, you're not going to see that from my administration. We're principled and, and they,
of course,
and they appeal to those values that we all have. But then when push comes to shove, what do? Like they actually do the preemptive pardons. They actually go out and do these things. And I think that this is a real mask off moment here, because the idea that you needed to pardon these people is preposterous. I honestly think, and I mean, Trump said this in his speech, and I think this is important. Trump said this in his speech that like, we're going forward. We're rooting out the corrupt people in the Justice Department, but we're going forward. And he kind of alluded to the fact that like, hey, we're not going to go after you guys, but we're going to get rid of the people who were going after other people, and we're going to root out the corruption, and like we're going to get rid of this stuff. Which I found all the more ironic because as he was talking, he had no idea that like Biden had like pardoned his entire family, right? And but this is the thing, is that all along, everything that they accused Trump of doing, like they have been doing all along. And so we it's very hard if you're a person who pays attention and who just like reads the news and tries to take in different perspectives. It was very frustrating the last 4 years to listen to all of these people lecture us on, American values, American norms, and, how we do things in the government. Because if you were actually paying attention, you realize that they were actually shattering all of these norms. And yet somehow there was still a significant chunk of people who believed these things. And I think that what the last days of the Biden administration revealed is they revealed who Joe Biden really is. Joe Biden has always been a corrupt politician. Joe Biden was never a stand-up guy. He was always a shady guy. He was always a guy that was doing whatever he could to get ahead, whether it was plagiarizing speeches or what have you. And the thing is like it's actually like the pardons for his family are kind of funny because I heard somebody say this, that like, there's like, I don't know, it was like a plot of a novel or a movie where there's a husband and who wants to murder his wife. And so what he does is he has a party and he just poisons everybody at the party. And so like lots of people die, but no one suspects him but like they would have if it was only his wife.
Right.
And that's kind of what Joe Biden was doing, because the thing is that, he pardoned his whole family, but really like James Biden was really the only person that somebody might have gone after. And I think, and for good reason, because James Biden was on the record saying Joe Biden never met with any business partners that were involved in his and Hunter's sort of business operation. But then a picture came out about 2 weeks ago of Joe Biden standing with all of the people in some of those meetings. And so he said that under oath that Joe Biden had never met with them. And now somebody had provided photographic evidence that he had actually done that. And so, he might have actually needed a pardon for, a possible perjury charge. But I think that really he did the whole family to mask who the real person was that he was trying to protect, which was his brother. I think that's really what was going on, because half of these other people, no one even knows who they are. Like they know that they exist,
right?
But like we've never heard anything about them or their business dealings or whatever. And so to me, it was a huge mask off moment. And I think that it's actually good for going forward, because I think it only sort of galvanizes what Trump is trying to do, because people are going to recognize like, hey, like look at how corrupt this guy is. I can't believe we ever let this guy lecture us. And also it should empower people around Trump to basically be like, no, we see how things work here. Okay. And so we're going to acknowledge that, and we're going to be out front about it. And that the optimal strategy here is that you have to play politics, and you have to do tit for tat strategies when people are not following the rules. That's the only way. Like we've talked about this many times. Like if you're playing football and one team's just allowed to grab people by the face mask and throw them down, and they never get penalized for it. Well, if your team just refuses to grab the face mask on principle because that's against the rules, you're going to lose.
Yes.
And so what you have to do is you have to start grabbing their face masks until finally somebody steps in and goes, enough.
Yeah. No, hey, we're going to start calling face masks now.
Right. And so I think that there's a little bit of that aspect to this, where it's like, okay, look, this is what they're doing. And in fact, I think it gave Trump a lot of cover to do sort of broad pardons for the sort of January 6th people.
It's funny you say that. We have stuff to get to. We can't stay forever today. You've got to get back to campus in about an hour. I've got a basketball game I'm covering tonight. So we can't just go forever, and there's a lot to get to. But you said that, and when the pardons came down, my initial reaction was, on the J6 thing, I'd heard Vance say, hey, we're going to look at it case by case. And I was just like, screw it. Pardon everybody. Just go do it. Do it today. Pardon everyone. And then lo and behold, he did it. And there was this mass, reaction from the predicted camps. But it was, hey, if that's going to be the precedent, that's where this goes. You can't ask one side, to your point, you can't ask one side to be reserved and cautious and quiet when the other side is just free for all. And the Fauci one is the one that gets me. You know that he gets not only pardoned, but a pardon all the way back to 2014. I thought he hadn't done anything, and so now you're acknowledging, yeah, he did a lot, right? Which we all knew, and he gets pardoned, and so you do the J6 thing, and you pardon people that. Look, man, I think the overwhelming majority of those people, especially the ones who've already served prison time, deserved to be pardoned. Let's move on. But there were a few that, I think if you evaluated their case carefully, you would say, well, I don't know, a little bit there. But I was kind of glad. I was like, that's what happens. And you can't applaud one set of pardons and then come back on the other and go, no, that's not right. You have to acknowledge that if these are going to be the rules, to your point, if face mask is allowed and you're not tackling by the face mask, well, you're a dumbass, right? And so that's what's happened. All right, so we have some questions here. Drew wants to know, how does the proposed 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico affect the economy? President Trump was asked about those this afternoon, and I think his third press conference of the day. And he said those would start February the 1st. So we're 10 days from those.
So I think that actually, I anticipate that Mexico and Canada are going to try to figure out whatever they can do to try to stop these from being implemented in the first place.
It's the art of the deal. Right?
Yeah.
He's gonna, this is part of the negotiation.
Because so when you think about tariffs, the way to think about tariffs in terms of like who actually ends up paying for the cost, right? So in other words, when you have a sales tax, for example, like Walmart doesn't want to pay any of the sales tax. They want to pass that all on to you.
Right.
Okay. But the problem is like the more they try to do that, the less that you'll actually purchase. And so in practice, you're sort of like meeting in the middle, like the after sales tax price, like you're sort of paying part of the sales tax and they're paying some of the sales tax, right? So like after taxes, they're getting less money than they wanted to pay. And before, and like when you're actually paying,
because they're technically kind of coming off the retail price.
Right.
Right.
And so that's the way to think about tariffs, is sort of like, who bears the burden? Is it the seller, like the foreign seller, or is it the domestic consumer? And so what really, really matters here is who has the market power. Like, and so especially when it comes to Canada, but also when it comes to Mexico, the issue for both Canada and Mexico is like, we're their biggest customer. Right. And so if you're a relatively small international customer, you end up paying most of the tariff yourself. Right. So if we hardly buy anything from, I don't know, like Lithuania or something like that, and we put a tariff on Lithuanian goods, the American consumer is going to end up paying like most of that tariff. Like the price of the good is going to go up by almost exactly the amount of the tariff for the consumer. And like the person selling the stuff in Lithuania, they're barely going to notice.
Right.
But like we buy like 3/4 of like Canadian exports. Okay. So we're like the huge buyer. And so the reason in my previous example that like the Lithuanian seller doesn't really end up paying much is because they have all of these other customers that they can sell it to. So if you don't want it, they don't care. They'll sell it to them, right?
They'll sell it to Romania.
Right. And so you end up paying for most of the tax. Well, we're like the biggest buyer of Canadian goods. And so since we're the biggest buyer of Canadian goods, what that means is like the Canadian suppliers are actually going to have to eat a large chunk of the tariff themselves, which means that U.S. consumers will likely see higher prices of goods coming from Canada, but less than the amount of the tariff, which means it's going to harm Canadian businesses a lot. And so I expect that the Canadian government and the Mexican government are going to come to Trump and say, what do we got to do? Like, what's the agreement? What do we need to do to stop this from happening? Because, yes, it could be costly to the American consumer, but it's going to be much more costly to these Canadian and Mexican companies. And they're not going to want to deal with that. And they're going to put political pressure on their leaders to be like, hey, like we can't do this. And like, this is our market. Like this is like where we predominantly sell stuff to. And so like, we're suffering here.
So if you're Trump and the Americans, the goal of this threat is to drive down the prices on that end?
Well, I think that his goal is actually to make them come to the negotiation table and like make concessions. Like when it comes to Mexico, I think that what he really wants from Mexico is he wants them to agree to cooperation on the border. He wants them to actually try to rein in the cartels. I think that when it comes to Canada, I think that there's actually there is a very porous border there. We don't think about it very much, right? Because we don't like typically the emphasis on the border is at the southern border.
The New York Times, by the way, is very concerned today about, you mentioned cartels, and I think it's important that I interrupt you and say this because these are sensitive times. The New York Times says how labeling cartels terrorist could hurt the U.S. economy. Isolating U.S. companies from cartel activities could be almost impossible given that the criminal groups operate in sectors like agriculture and tourism, leaving some American businesses vulnerable to sanctions. We don't want to label the cartels terrorists. This is just...
This is about as close as we're going to get to like cartels are actually good. Like we're like speed running the news cycle.
It's 3 weeks from Valentine's Day, for God's sake. What are we doing?
We're speed running we're speed running this. Normally we get there are no cartels. Like we don't have to worry about that. To like, okay, yes, there are cartels, they're a problem, but it's not that big of a deal. And then we get like, hey, like actually cartels are pretty good. Like and so
just don't label them like
no.
that. Goodness.
I mean, the idea that you wouldn't is kind of insane. I mean, but this is the thing. I mean, that's what Trump wants. I mean, Trump wants them to try to rein in these cartels, but also, at the Canadian border, he wants them to actually enforce their border because it turns out that there's like a lot of like fentanyl coming across the northern border, and he wants to get that under control. And the Canadians, could essentially, tighten up their border security to prevent these sort of things from happening.
All right, another quick question. We'll just run through 2 or 3 of these. I don't know how to pronounce the first name. The last name is Fernandez. He says, what are some general areas in demand? What are some general areas in demand? I guess he's referring to job areas for Econ bachelor's postgrad.
Econ, you can actually do like a lot of things. I mean, I think typically people think about, primarily like banking and finance related kind of jobs, but any sort of like analyst job, like lots of companies hire analysts from hedge funds to, Caterpillar, right? Like it sort of spans all industries. And because what Econ is really doing is it's teaching you a particular set of analytical skills. And so when you go into economics, like any sort of job that's going to involve any kind of like quantitative analysis, like when they list qualifications, they're always going to list economics as one of the degrees that they're looking for. And so there's actually a wide variety of things. We have like some of our majors actually get jobs that are sort of surprising to me. Like we had a student a couple of years ago, and she got her first job was like as a fraud investigator for a bank. And basically it was just like, we're just looking for somebody who understands incentives and how people, make financial decisions. And we need somebody who can do some kind of analysis to kind of figure out like what kind of behavior doesn't seem to like line up with, and so that was kind of fascinating to me.
When he posted this question, there were still 15 minutes left, but as of this moment, 5 minutes ago, all DEI offices have closed shop. They've been put on leave, I think, with the goal being to completely shut them down. That's pretty interesting. Who would have that? No one could have predicted 2 years ago that on January the 22nd, 2025, DEI would be this much under the microscope, but it very clearly is with this administration.
Well, and I think this is also an important thing because this is one of these things where when somebody tells you what it is, like it sounds fine or it sounds good, right? Like it's like, oh, like we're just trying to give people opportunities that they wouldn't have, or we're trying to include people who have been previously excluded from these things. But if you look at how all of these things work in practice, they're actually just entirely ideologically motivated. Yeah. So like they're not actually going to help the groups that they claim that they're going to help. They're actually going to help the people who talk about helping the groups that they're claiming to help. Right. And so like this is not going to affect the market for economists. This is going to affect the market for a lot of other fields because also a lot of this bureaucracy, to be frank, like exists as kind of like a make work program for people who get PhDs and things that make them otherwise unemployable.
Grind wants to know, it's a good one. So will the executive order ending birthright citizenship really last? He says, if so, how long? What's the difference between a wealthy family in Egypt choosing to have their baby in the United States versus an illegal immigrant crossing and having their child in the States?
So I think it's actually much. Now, I should preface this by saying that a lot of the commentary on this is basically that this is that this is just not going to. It's not going to last. That courts are going to strike this down. I don't think a lot of courts have the balls to do it,
to enforce it,
like to actually because what's going to happen is so the controversy here is really over the 14th Amendment, and so his executive order is based on an interpretation of the 14th Amendment that essentially says that like there is no birthright citizenship, that was invented by the court's interpretation of the 14th Amendment.
Okay.
And so I think there's a higher likelihood that this order survives and that becomes the law of the land than most people do. But I still think that the odds are probably low, just because I think like the courts don't seem to have the stomach for this kind of a thing, like because of what they're going to see as significant costs. But for example, like if you read the 14th Amendment, if you read the 14th Amendment and you read it recognizing the context in which it was written, it's very, very clear that what they're trying to do is they are trying to recognize former slaves as citizens. Like that's what they're trying to do. And so what they're basically saying is like, if you were in the 14th Amendment, is that like, if you were born here, you are a citizen, but there are also caveats to that, right? So like when they say that you were born here, it also has this little clause between two commas that said, like if you are born in the United States and not subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign power.
Okay.
Like there's a clause that I might not be getting the exact words right, but there is.
In other words, if you were a slave and you were born here, while you were a slave were not an American citizen, you also were not an Israeli citizen. Right. You were not a citizen of Argentina. You were being suppressed and you weren't being given your rights as a human being, but you were in America and that was the only place you were. And so subsequently, upon gaining your freedom, you have a child that was born in America. That child, even though you weren't technically an American citizen, that child is.
Well, the slave and the child, right? And
right,
so like
right.
the thing is that, so I think that like if you read the amendment carefully, you would say that someone who is here illegally, they have, like they still retain citizenship subject to some foreign power, right? And so the idea that they could have a child that would then automatically become a citizen doesn't necessarily like that doesn't necessarily follow from the way that the amendment is written. And so I think that there is actually an interesting legal argument here that has that.
So using Grind's example, an Egyptian couple, the child would be born, even though it was born in San Diego, the child would be born an Egyptian.
Well, in most places, I mean, like under the current interpretation of the law, that child would be a U.S. citizen, like because they were born here. Now they might have dual citizenship in the sense that like Egypt would say like, well, because you were born to Egyptian parents, that you also.
So it'd be a big deal if you end up being a really good soccer player.
Right.
You got a decision to
make.
Right.
But the thing is that but the interesting question is whether that birth is actually what the people who wrote the amendment had in mind. And it's important to note that like one of the reasons that they were debating this language is there was also an issue at the time about how you treat Native Americans. And so the idea was, well, if we just say you're born here, like you're a citizen, well, does that make all Native Americans citizens? And because they were born here, but at the time that this was written, there was opposition to making Native Americans citizens from both the American side and also from the Native American side. The point here is that the reason they were very careful about language is it's very, very clear that what they're trying to do is they're trying to write a very general amendment to the Constitution to clarify something which was primarily about slavery. But the way that it's been interpreted is like, well, if you're born here, then you're a citizen, because if you read that amendment a particular way, that's what it sounds like. Anybody born here is automatically a citizen. And that's the way that it's been interpreted for a very, very long time. But if you go back and you think about sort of like what the intentions were of the people who were writing it and what they thought that they were writing versus how it's been interpreted, I think that there is a case to be made that they didn't, that's not the correct interpretation. Now, the issue becomes the concept of birthright citizenship has been something that we all just accept as part of the United States, right? Like most people, if you tell them about this, they would assume that this is much more clear in the Constitution than what it actually is. And so I think that the difficulty here is that a lot of people, like everybody knows that this is the law of the land, or the way that the courts have ruled on this. I think that, I don't know what the polling would look like on this, but I suspect that there's a lot of actual support for this. Like a lot of Americans kind of like this idea that, like, sure, you're born here, you become a citizen, and like what, and but the question is what's the proper interpretation of the law? But I think the more popular this is, the harder it's going to be for, say, the Supreme Court to overturn it. I mean, Roberts doesn't really strike you as a person who likes to overturn precedent, especially if it's going to be very, very costly. Right. I mean, like, he sort of jumped through hoops to sort of justify the way that the Obamacare law was written.
For sure.
Because he just thought this would be chaotic and costly. And so this would be way more chaotic and costly to overturn than that was.
That makes a lot of sense.
And so I don't think that the courts are going to have the stomach for that kind of a thing. And I think that they're going to look at it and say, hey, like, where even if they read it and say, hey, look, I think the interpretation is wrong, like, it's too late now. Like, it's kind of like we've kind of already adopted that precedent, and to go back on that now would be difficult. I think that's probably where the courts are going to land. But I do think, like, but most people are treating this like, oh, this is an obvious win. And like, they're already like Democrat attorney generals suing the federal government, and they think they have a slam dunk case. And like, look, I think they'll ultimately win, but I don't know that it's the slam dunk case that they think it is. I think it's much harder to interpret.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, with the deportations and such, this was a major issue, if you remember, I'm sure you do, 8 years ago, Trump's first term. The media did the kids in cages, and AOC went to the border and cried, and all of those things. This is a reflection on my field, and I believe this strongly, and it's going to anger some people that work in my field, and I just don't care. We're just not friends anymore. It doesn't matter. You don't like me, it's mutual. That the mainstream media, the network media, the New York Times, they had cachet 8 years ago, 7 years ago. They don't have anymore. Number one, they've lost credibility. People don't trust them. Number two, there's so many different ways to consume media today, as we've seen from the whole TikTok thing, where Trump was just asked, do you have TikTok on your phone? And he's like, no, but I'm probably going to put it on there. I mean, whatever. People consume media in so many different ways now that I don't think media outrage is going to change public opinion on this. And I can't remember what the outlet was. It was Washington Post, New York Times. It was one of the big ones. It's like 83% of the American public is in favor of deporting anyone here illegally who has any criminal record. Like, you got to go. And frankly, they're for deporting most everyone and making you go through a legal process. So I almost wonder if this is Trump and his team, not just the one person, but his whole administration, swinging for the fences here, knowing that there's a real chance that the wind's going to knock it down. It's going to be a double or a triple, but making sure that you go for it.
Well, and the other thing too is like, look, everybody's framing this debate as, is there birthright citizenship or not? The other thing that we could get is a clarification from the courts, right? So a clarification from the court might be, hey, if you are here legally and you have a child, like that child is a citizen, but like if you were here illegally, then like that's not, then you're not entitled to the same, because by definition, like you're subject to a foreign power, right? Like you literally are a citizen of somewhere else and you are here in secret, right? Like you're hiding the fact that you're here. So it also might be, so it's not necessarily like one or the other. There might just be some clarification here in terms of like, well, what does this actually mean and who actually qualifies here? Like that's also a possibility that actually maybe what they're trying to do is define some gray area. But also I think that part of this executive order is to deter people from coming here illegally anyway. Because if you are thinking about coming to the United States and you're like, hey, I'm just going to sneak in, like we'll have our child here. It'll be hard to get rid of us because our child will be a child and a citizen. And so how are you going to, kick the family out? Or, I think part of it is also just a deterrent. Like, hey, don't come here. Because like it's possible that that's not even going to be the law of the land. It's possible that that's also their strategy, is just to do these things as a deterrent. Like, hey, we're going to do whatever we can to prevent this from being a thing.
Austin, and we're jumping around. There's just a lot here. Thank you for the super chat. He says, would love to hear both of your takes on this, on Trump wanting to buy Greenland. Is it real? What are the benefits? Would it be a state? I don't know enough about this to truly answer.
Do we want Greenland? The answer is yes. We want Greenland because of its location. Like it would be very, very good for our Navy to have.
From a geopolitical standpoint, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, is it possible? This really is going to come down to what Greenland wants, to be honest. Like, so the people of Greenland, like they have really seized on this as an opportunity to get away. So that they are currently a territory of Denmark.
Right.
But they have used this as an opportunity to say, hey, we're not Danish. We don't want to be a territory of Denmark. And so it's possible that they're just using this to try to just get independence, period. And they're using this as leverage. But it's also possible that they're looking around and going, like if we're going to be a territory of somebody, maybe we want to be a territory of the United States rather than.
So it'd be sort of like Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't think it'll be, I really don't think it'll be a state. Because I think that the people of Greenland really seem to want to keep their independence. But I think they also, there's also a general sense there, though, that like
that is so disappointing for the Pac-12. They really wanted to add Greenland because it would fit right in with Wake Forest and Stanford.
Well, that flight from Stanford to Greenland, it makes total sense. So, I mean, that's.
All right. I told you what struck me on Monday. I intended to watch the Notre Dame Michigan game in large part because I knew you were as engaged in it as you were as a Notre Dame fan, and you were worried about all of the hell you were going to catch from your Michigan friends. And I was in our living room downstairs, which just has one TV, and we had the TV on. Trump had been at the rally at Capital One Arena. And he was back at the Oval Office for the first time as president in 4 years. And he's at the desk, and the poor guy with him is saying, Mr. President, he's got a sharp little stick note. Mr. President, this is a resolution to whatever. And Trump does this big signature, and you start hearing questions. And it was the female, she has an accent. She doesn't sound like she's American. I can't regardless. She was asking questions. And Laura, my wife, was like, she needs to stop. He's working, you know? And I'm like, no. We want to have discourse between media and the officials that are elected officials. That's disinfectant. It's sunshine. We want, let's have communication. And then I heard Peter Ducey ask a question. You're kind of losing track of time. You know, we're cooking. We've had a busy day, and Carson's going somewhere, and Eka is going somewhere, and so we got stuff going on. And you realize it's been 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and he's still just answering questions. At that point, I mean, I pour a bourbon, and I go sit down on the couch, and I'm watching this, and it went on, I don't know, it felt like 2 hours. It was crazy. I was like, and Laura said, Biden would never. And I said, well, Biden could never. But you're right. He would never. And we've seen that for 3 days now. And I know it's the first, we're in the somewhere around 50 some odd hours of the Trump presidency. And so it will probably at some point slow a little bit, but it's very clear that at least in the early going, he intends to be pretty public about what he wants to do. His relationship with the media is completely different than that of his predecessor. It's wild to watch the media bitch about it. Like, you should never bitch about access when you're getting it. I try not to bitch about a lack of access because it makes you sound whiny, but you don't bitch about, hey, we're opening everything up. Okay, cool. But I think the public likes this. I think the public likes hearing, here's what we're doing. Yes, this is what I did. This give and take, free for all. I don't know. It's kind of just a wide-ranging thought, but it's been one of the things that's really struck me over the first few days is the complete difference in the communication with the media, which therefore is communication with the American people.
So a couple of things. So the old Dickens line, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. That was my Monday. So, I mean, okay. So
sorry about
no. Like, here's the issue. So I grew up Catholic in the Midwest. So naturally, you know, I rooted for Notre Dame. Like, Catholic family, they all root for Notre Dame. My grandfather is a huge Notre Dame fan. But the thing is like what I always tell people is, I was like, so those were the games I went to growing up were Notre Dame games. Like the first college football game I ever saw was Notre Dame and LSU in Notre Dame Stadium.
Oh, it's a pretty good one.
And so anyway, but what I tell people is like that all of that childhood joy of being a Notre Dame fan was just destroyed by the Charlie Weiss era at Notre Dame. Like it was so, I was in the stadium I was in the stadium. I was in the end zone seats to watch them lose to Navy in overtime in 2007. And that was it for me, really. That exact moment was kind of like, what am I doing? Like, why am I here? And so the thing is like, you know, I still root for them, but I don't have like the childhood, like love. Right.
Right.
And, but you know, like they're making a run through the playoffs, and I'm like, and that child in you is starting to be like, hey, this is it. This is exciting,
here
right?
We go, yeah.
And so they're really excited. And then the other half of this is I grew up in Northwestern Ohio, and surrounded by Ohio State Buckeye fans, who, in case like you've never met one, these are the worst fans on the planet. Like these are the absolute worst fans on the planet. There's no one worse than these people. They will literally collect, like Buckeyes are a real thing, right? They fall off trees. They will literally go around and like collect Buckeyes. And then like when they know that you hate Ohio State and your team loses to Ohio State, like they'll hide them in your house. Like you'll open up a drawer to get a pen and there's a Buckeye. You will go to your bathroom and you'll go to get like an extra roll of toilet paper and there's a Buckeye, right? Like they put them in your refrigerator. Like these people, they're insufferable, right? And so as I'm watching that, like I'm simultaneously like,
so they're Alabama fans.
Yeah, that's the only thing I can compare it to, but it's worse. It's actually worse. And I'm going to tell you why it's worse.
All right.
I have actually met Alabama fans who are gracious, right? So like, here's the thing, like some fan bases are gracious in victory. Some fan bases are gracious in defeat. I've actually met a gracious Alabama fan. I have never, ever met a gracious Ohio State fan. They're not gracious in victory. They are not gracious in defeat. It's okay. And so the thing is like, I'm simultaneously this childhood excitement, right? Is like coming back to me. And I'm like, oh, this is it. Like, I think they're actually going to do it. Right. And, but then I'm looking at the other side of the bracket and I'm seeing, and I started telling everybody like weeks in advance. I said, I know how this is going to play out. Notre Dame is going to play Ohio State and Ohio State's going to beat them. And then all of these people are going to start sending me messages like, hey, you still a Notre Dame fan? Did you see that game? And so, yeah, so that was the worst of times. But then on the other hand, yeah, you had the Donald Trump show going on, which is just captivating. Like, it's just completely captivating. Like you just sit there and like, it's like, what other, we've never had a president like this ever. Like, who's just is like sitting there and is just like, I'm going to sign these executive orders. And oh, by the way, like, let's just chit chat while I do it. Right. And like, let me just tell
a free
you,
for all. Yeah. No script.
And yeah,
nothing,
it's just like, we're
ask
not,
whatever you want to ask. Yeah.
And it was just, it's like the most fascinating thing in the entire world. And I think that, but I also think that like this time around, like, so the first time around, like that seemed to be a detriment to him. Like people kind of found it annoying. Like, oh, he's on TV all the time. He doesn't stop talking. And like, I kind of feel like this time around, people are kind of like, you know what? I like this. Cause like, I like getting like, you know, he just says what he thinks. And like, so I know like what, you know, he's like, what he's doing, what he's thinking, like where this is coming from. Like, and because the public likes access as much as the media does. They love to hear this stuff. I mean, that's why they want the media to have access, because they want the media to be the conduit to them. And he just speaks directly to them. But I also think that Trump learned this time around too, that this is actually the best way to communicate with the American public is you don't communicate through the media. You just communicate directly to the American public. He knows they're broadcasting this. He knows that whatever he says, they might try to filter it, you know, for their reporting. But if you tuned in live, you heard it. You got exact. And so I think like he loves just talking directly to the American people, because then it's outside of the media filter. They can't say, oh, he said this when he really said that, or they can't try to act like something was controversial when it really wasn't, because people are just seeing it. And it's fascinating.
Yeah, it truly is, because I won't pin this on just Biden. I mean, this was this way with Obama, with Bush, with probably the closest we've ever gotten to this was Clinton pre-Lewinsky. You know, when he was just kind of getting started, he had some off the cuff, you know, he'd go in there and chop it up with the media a little bit. You didn't really get it with the older Bush. You certainly didn't get it with older Reagan. Maybe you got it beginning of Reagan a little bit, but that was before my time. And then I don't remember before that. I was a kid. I don't remember Carter and Ford, and I mean, I remember them, but I don't remember them. So yeah, first time in my lifetime that you've seen that, and I think it's refreshing. And he's taking questions. He's not filtering the questions. I'm sure he's going to get some questions he doesn't like, but he seems to be answering them. Like he's been asked about Ukraine and Russia, and I do think that's something that a lot of Americans want to know about, and he was pretty firm with what he said. I think it was today. I lose track now. Yesterday with it needs to end. I mean, he basically sent a message, you know, through his words to Putin that this needs to end. Was asked, when do you plan to meet with him? And he said, anytime. He's ready to meet. I took that to be, this is front of mind. Like this, we need to get this done. We've spent too much money on this. This is not going anywhere. There's too many people dying. Let's end this. I just thought that level of communication is refreshing and probably effective in terms of getting things done.
Well, and also it sort of makes clear, you know, like what's going on, like, because
Brian says, I love him showing the signed orders. Like,
oh, yes.
Look, I signed it. We have no idea what you signed, but there it is. Yeah.
But anyway, but the great part is though, this has become like memes, like on the internet now, because now people just take the picture of him, and then they just like and then they just edit out the text and then they just put whatever they want in there because it's also like he's a showman and he just loves it. Like he just loves being like, here it is, and like we're gonna take a picture and this is gonna be great. And no, it's amazing. And I think that the other thing is that on this like foreign policy stuff, I mean, I think this is something that people were waiting for. Like, okay, now what's going to happen? Because like before he took office, he was saying things like, "Well, I'm going to end this, I'm going to do this, or whatever." And and I thought like a lot of people will complain about like releasing that statement, like, "Oh, you should do this behind closed doors or whatever." Like, I actually thought it was good because it gives people the indication that like, hey, look, we want this to end. We're willing to sit down with you and get this to an end, but also like, hey, like
he basically said it ends one way or the other.
Yeah, and basically it was like but like if you don't come to the table, then we're gonna continue to punish you, and not only punish you in the ways that you'd previously been punished, but we're gonna ramp up the punishments. Right. And so I think that that's a very, very clear sign that he's just like communicating very strongly that like it's time to get these people to the table and end this thing. And we'll see what happens because we don't really know what the other parties involved are going to do. And also, you've got like, Europeans who think that they have a voice in this, even though we're paying for everything. And I mean, it does involve their security to some extent, but like, we're essentially, we're essentially in charge indirectly. And so I thought it was good to sort of communicate that because this is, one of the significant issues, right? I mean, this has been like, we never got clear communication from the Biden administration on why this was even happening or why we were involved. It was always just like, oh, we're fighting for democracy. And it was like, I
think we kind of got a clue on Monday morning in case we really wanted to know. I think there might have been a hint.
Yeah. Well, those pardons, I don't know. The other thing about those pardons as it relates to Ukraine is also like, remember like Hunter's pardon started January 1st, 2014, which is just like, that's a really odd day to just choose out of the blue. Right. Yeah. But he did the same thing for Fauci and he did the same thing for the rest of his family. And then I was kind of thinking like, did he just do that on the subsequent pardon so it looks like that's just his general pardon, right? Like that he just always starts pardons on January 1st, 2014? Or, were these strategic? Because as it relates to Hunter and his family, that date actually seems significant. But also as it relates to Fauci, it seems significant because if you look into like when a lot of this gain of function research started, it's also around that time. And so, on the one hand, that was an interesting question to me is like, is he just trying to hide, the length of Hunter's pardon by just giving everyone really long pardons? But then, when you start looking into this, 2014 seems like a significant date for Fauci, but also for all of this stuff in Ukraine. And so I think that, there might be some significance there, but we do seem to have circumstantial evidence now that the corruption was real and that we can all know that the corruption took place and that we don't really have to deny it anymore or speculate that this corruption was really going on because it seems very, very clear that the corruption was happening and that, everyone involved that he cares about has now been pardoned for such crimes.
I mean, the good news is that The View was able to get Bishop Marianne Booty on their show today after her sermon on Tuesday. I thought that was good of The View. That was pretty big get for them.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. So first off, the comments themselves were just completely inappropriate for the setting. But not only were they completely inappropriate for the setting, what I was most offended by is like the woman had an iPad. When she had an iPad. And first of all, like I don't care if you're 3 years old. Like, there's no iPad in the church. Okay, like let's keep that out of the church. Also, if you got something important to say, like, why don't you just rehearse it until you have it memorized? Like, why do we have an iPad? Like this is this is a little ridiculous. But But no, in all seriousness, what strikes me about this whole exercise is actually the extent to which the old media tricks don't work anymore. Because the way that this worked in the previous Trump administration is basically like Trump would go to something, somebody would quote unquote stand up to Trump and, tell him like it is, right? And then immediately the next day they're on every cable news channel, they're on every talk show, and they're presented as the hero who spoke truth to power.
That was kind of my point from earlier, is that would get traction then. It doesn't seem to get traction now. People are like, what are you doing? What? No, and like we saw the pictures of Trump's facial reaction, and J.D. Vance, who is apparently not a very good poker player. Melania she is a good poker player. She would be good at poker. You got to see it all, and this time I think more people are like, "Nah, I'm with them. I'm totally with them. You're off base here."
Well, people see it for what it is. Like, this is not an appropriate moment to sort of take that position, and also like people see it for what it is, which is like once you realize that this is the process, it's not speaking truth to power if it's also making you famous. Right. So like if you're just calling people out and then you get to be mini celebrity and go around on all the shows and everybody knows who you are, like you're getting a reward. Well, that's not really what we think of when we think of somebody like, speaking truth to power. Right. We think of somebody who doesn't have power, saying something to somebody with power. And the reason that the act itself is powerful is because that person is not somebody that anybody knows and who's not going to be rewarded for saying the thing, right? But this is, but it's very, very clear. Like this woman used this as an opportunity to make her political statement and then go on the cable news tour. And I'm sure she'll be on Jimmy Kimmel and she'll be on Colbert and she'll be on all these places and she'll be famous and probably somebody will try to give her a book deal or something like that. Like this is how this always goes. But the thing is like, this is not going to work this time around because no one cares. Like last time around, what happened is when they first started going on the shows, like they were, you saw a lot of people celebrating them. Like, yes, like, finally somebody, said something. And like this time around, people are just like laughing at her and being like, just go away. Like, who cares? Oh, shocking. You showed up on The View, right? Like they're like, everybody's just kind of over it. Like everybody's like, we know the formula and you're just doing the formula again.
No one's watching The View anymore. No. Right. That's my point. They gave away their credibility.
Yep.
You don't get to give it away and then get it back. It's gone.
Right.
You told a bunch of lies. It got revealed as lies. And so now, even if you're the boy that cried wolf, even if you start telling truth, no one's going to believe you for a while, maybe ever. Like, no one's watching Jake Tapper. I've got Jake Tapper on in here just because I like to look at his sour face. No one's listening to Jake Tapper anymore. His credibility's gone. It's gone. No one's listening to him. I mean, not enough people to matter. No one's hyperbolic. You know what I mean? All right, we got to go in a minute. You got stuff? I've got stuff. There's a raging debate in lip-reading circles. What do you think Barron Trump said to Joe Biden? What do you hope Barron Trump said to Joe Biden? Because he clearly said something, and Biden's facial expression changed.
Yeah, he went. Biden has Biden has three facial expressions. Okay, he only has three. So expression one is happiness. So his smiles.
Yes.
Expression two is anger.
Yes.
And expression three is fear.
Okay.
Okay. And which is kind of and for the last like probably year, it's really just been anger and fear. He kind of just hovers back and forth between anger and fear. And you would see this in his speeches because you could tell he wasn't like reading them or anything beforehand, And so like, because he would read a speech and he would say something like, a Chevy plant closed down in Michigan last week and we can't allow that. And now the unemployment rate is down to 3.5%. And you're like, okay, the second thing was supposed to be positive, and then the first thing was supposed to be negative. Yeah. But he couldn't stop the anger. Like the anger, that was the only expression that he had. And And so I don't know what he said to him, but I would like to imagine that, you know, that he really just kind of said something to the effect of, you did this to my family and I'm never going to forget it, or something like that. Because look, it'd be really disappointing if he just said something like,
It's nice to see
it's
you.
nice to see you, because Biden went from the happiness to the fear, like, immediately. It wasn't anger, it was fear, right? And so I would like to imagine that he said something, that justified that change. But the problem is like, given the experience of Joe Biden, like, his facial expressions and his mannerisms don't always match like the true emotion of what he's supposed to be feeling at that moment.
The one thing that struck me about all of the inauguration day stuff is everyone in the media, and they were right, we're talking about Melania Trump's hat and her outfit and how elegant she looked. And she did. She's a beautiful woman, and she's a beautiful hat, and I'm sure it will become a fashion thing. But maybe it's just me having a mother and a wife and daughters. You sort of know when they're pissed off. And she had a look. You could barely see her eyes. But when you did, and I don't think it was just, hey, my feet are starting to hurt. There was something more there around those people, because she softened quite a bit when she wasn't around those people anymore. Did you notice that? When they were gone and it was just her family at the viewing stand, when it was just her family at the ball, even at the church service the next day, there was a difference. That hat was worn for a reason. In my opinion, it was message sent. That was woman not scorned. That's not it. That was Mama Bear. You came after my family. That's what I took from that. There's a different air about her, them. There's a different air about Trump. Like, I've heard some people say, man, it's like Trump's back. And I'm like, no, this is different. There's something different about this person this time around than in 2017, 2018, when I'm convinced he didn't really believe he was going to be president, and he was somewhat embattled the whole time. There's something different here. It's why I'm watching the first few days with such interest, is that I think he's far more dialed in, more focused, more purposeful is the word.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. So one of the powerful things, I guess I didn't mention from the speech that he said, and like the reaction from, the people sitting behind him, was kind of like, none of them actually rolled their eyes, but like that, you could tell that was like their emotion. But I thought it was like actually a powerful moment, because he talked about the assassination attempt. And then he said, I believe that my life was saved so that I can make America great again. And I actually thought that was a really powerful line, because I genuinely think that he believes that, and that that's important to him. Like, I do think that that instilled in him a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
And also gave him a perspective on the moment, right? That you can only get from a near-death experience. So I thought that was a significant thing, and I thought that's partially why he appears, different than before, is because of what he has gone through, including the assassination attempt. Melania has always been very, she's never been outspoken, but she has always spoken through fashion. Like, even in the first administration, she would choose things very carefully, to make a political statement without actually saying anything. Especially when she thought that the media was just being incredibly unfair to her husband. I think that, yes, her outfit was very clearly, it was like female assassin kind of like outfit. Like, it was like, I am here to I know what you did, and I'm here to exact my revenge. There was very much that kind of a look. And
because you couldn't see her eyes.
No,
you had to go look for her eyes.
Yeah. And
so
I thought that was a powerful statement, but also you contrast that with her, at the ball that night, right? Like, she had changed into a gown, right? She was laughing and smiling, and when Trump was dancing with the sword, she was laughing a lot, and so it was very much like in that moment, you know, it was very much a sort of mama bear moment at the actual festivities of the day. But then you could tell, like later on that night, then it was, it's time for fun. It's time to enjoy these things. The bad people are gone.
Yeah, I took the exact same thing. All right, last thing. The rumor was it would happen today. It did not happen today. But it appears that it will happen. He's done everything else he said he's going to do. He's going to release all these files. JFK files are apparently first up. Do you anticipate there's going to be some giant smoking gun in those files, or is this going to lead to just tons of more speculation? There's going to be lots of, like, if you open up the files completely, right? There's going to be leads that were ridiculous that turned out to be completely false. There's going to be all sorts of things. Is there a smoking gun in those files?
I don't think so. I mean, the reason that I have always supported this is like, look, we've talked about this before. I don't believe the Lee Harvey Oswald, lone gunman. I don't
Right.
believe that. I don't think I've ever met anybody who does, to be honest. I don't like anybody that you talk to, even people who think that Lee Harvey Oswald maybe pulled the trigger. There are like, yeah, well, there was somebody else there, or there was some broader, thing. He wasn't acting alone, whatever. I really don't think that there's going to be a smoking gun in there. The reason that I have always wanted these to be released is I think that you owe it to the general public to release this information. Like that in fact, if there is no sort of like smoking gun, we know something you don't know in the files, it makes it even worse that they don't release them.
Yeah.
Because that's like, well, what were you hiding? What was the big deal? Why did you have to do this the whole time? And I think that sort of thing just fosters distrust between the government and its people. And so, like, the reason I've always thought that they should be released is that it's been such a long time that, like, what could possibly be in there that's damning? And also, like, shouldn't you do this just to like show that you trust the American people with this information? Like, what could possibly be in there that you're trying to hide? I think that at one time there was probably information in there that would have put people's lives in danger or something like that, especially like, and I'm not even talking about necessarily like people, working inside the government and maybe like in covert action. I'm talking about like, hey, somebody has a theory that actually this guy was involved and they investigated. It turns out he wasn't. Like, that guy still would have been in danger if they released those files, within a certain period of time. And so I understand that those kinds of concerns, but like, they really have no excuse. Now it's just kind of like, okay, you're either hiding something or like you're just being completely obnoxious. Just be, upfront with the American people. Let them look at these things. Let them satisfy their curiosity, and like, let's move on with our day.
Josh, as always, I appreciate spending some time. I know you got to get back to campus. I've got to get to campus here in a little bit to cover Ole Miss and Texas A&M. But we'll be back with another edition of the Josh Hendrickson Show soon. Thanks to Josh. Thanks to all of you in the stream as well at MPW Digital. We'll have this up in audio podcast form here in a bit as well. So until next time, take care.